the honor I have is to introduce Captain Derrick Johnson with the Phoenix Fire Department and Vice Chair of the Arizona State Advisory Group on Juvenile Justice. Captain Johnson has been a member of SAG since October 1998, was appointed by then Republican Governor Jane Hall, and reappointed by our current Governor, Janet Napolitano. He also serves on the Governor's Task Force on Juvenile Correction Reform, served on the Governor's Juvenile Justice Federal Advisory Board from 2003 to 2006. Throughout his tenure as a civil servant, Captain Johnson has been dedicated to being an active member of his community and a champion for child welfare. He has been involved in many children's welfare issues such as gang prevention and youth mentoring programs. The Arizona Governor's School Readiness Board, he is a member of Early Childhood Development nonprofit organization, and has served on several local and county government commissions.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Ranking Member Platts, and thank you, Congressman Grijalva, for your introduction and also for your welcome, and also the committee as a whole, and for Subcommittee for listening to us today and listening to what we have to say about this issue. Some people have asked me, how did a firefighter get involved in juvenile justice? And my experience started with working in the inner city of Phoenix, and I currently still do, where I was seeing young people, and unfortunately as recently as the last 2 months, I've seen 4 young people who have been shot to death and also seriously injured. I wanted to know why this was going on, because not only were the lives of these children being destroyed, but also their families and the community. So that led me into actually going out and spending time with the kids and listening to their families and to their issues, and finding out that a lot of these children were misinformed. They certainly had the wrong view of the world, in the sense that they felt like they were invincible. And when you looked at the influences that involved with these children, and there was certainly a lot of social economics and values and beliefs, what was common to me is that most children didn't want to be in that process if they had an alternative. And that led me to being involved with children's issues, as my testimony spoke about. And what I found myself looking at was a systematic way of dealing with these children and these families. You could fix a neighborhood, you could maybe even fix a certain part of the city, but it seemed to just move around and be very pervasive. So when I looked at and was asked by our former Governor, Jane Hall, to sit on the SAG, I didn't know much about it. It said for State Advisory Group, and I thought that was kind of a catchy name, and so I started looking into it. What I found out was that the core principles, the 4 principles that were very important to this, and what was very important to me was that it came from a federal level. It just didn't allow states to decide what they wanted to do, because collectively as a nation we decided that kids should be treated differently. And we may go back and forth on how that should be and why that should be, but we all agreed as a country that kids are different than adults. And some of those principles were to prevent juvenile delinquency and keep kids out of the criminal justice system. I think we all know that as you go through life, no one wants to stay in that process their entire life. Reduce racial and ethnic disparities at all points of the system, provide age-appropriate and developmentally appropriate programs, as well as punishments for children. And then also to invest in the resources, which is our children. At a state level, what that did, this particular act did, was it allowed these state advisory groups to be made up of people across the community, and that's how I actually was involved in this. It also requires that there's federal funding for delinquency programs and improvement in local and juvenile justice programs, that there's a coordination, and it also created the OJJDP, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency and Prevention. The 4 requirements are DSO, which is deinstitutionalization of status offenders, which simply just means you can't lock kids up for things that an adult would do that wouldn't be considered a crime, such as smoking, truancy, tobacco use, things like that. Adult in jail lockup removal. What we found through research is that when kids are put in with adults, they're easily influenced, but they also become victims of adults that are in the system. Sight and sound separation, which just means keep kids and adults away from each other so they can't be intimidated and they certainly can't be touched. And disproportionate minority contact with youth. And that just meant that making sure that kids that are in the system that are minorities are just treated with equity. It's as simple as that. The money that comes down to the states are very important, and I wanted to share a few successes that have happened in our state of Arizona. We have, through this group, We all collectively look at this and we decide how these monies should be spent based on these programs. And one is alternative to detention. And in our state in 2006, approximately 3,400 youth were going through the system that would have gone through the law enforcement system, but actually went to detention programs. And this keeps kids out of the system. And these were very simple things in the sense that kids just didn't have to go through the criminal system. They could go to alternatives, and that was good for the family. General prevention, and out of that we had 1,500 youths that were served in these delinquency programs. Some of the outcomes were that 85% of the youth reported a positive change in their school attendance. Also, 86% of the youth served reported a positive change in their antisocial behavior. And then DMC, and we looked at doing different practices. And I wanted to share that with you just to say that this is a very important act. I certainly hope that you reauthorize it, and I would just ask you to support this program. And that's all I have to say.